Using a slow shutter speed, you can do this to balance ambient light or for special effects. And there's something else I want to talk to you about, and it's called rear curtain sync. And so the way to see this is very, very easy. So I've got a couple of pictures here, and I did this outside in Phoenix one night. So when your curtains open in your shutter, normally the first curtain opens, and as soon as it's open, that's when the flash fires, right? So boom, it fires. That's by default. You can also set your flash to fire just before the second curtain closes. So the curtain opens, it's open for a while, and then boom, right before the second curtain closes, the flash fires, and then it closes. And what this will do when you're dragging the shutter, it will change the way that your light looks. So let me illustrate this for you. And this is something that you would do in a really low light environment. And it's something that wedding photographers do a lot, and it's pretty spectacular. We'll see if we can do it in here. One of the things I've noticed is that the Canon remote system doesn't do rear curtain sync. I'm not sure why. It's probably a user issue, but we'll try this with the flash on the camera to see how it works. But first curtain sync, let's say you have a car with bright headlights, and the shutter speed here is slow enough that we're seeing the car move from here all the way to here. Okay? So that's the ambient light that we're seeing there. So the curtain opens, the flash fires, pow. When the flash fires, it freezes this car. So that car is frozen, but the shutter is still open, and the car continues to move, and so we get these streaks of light from the headlight. All right? And that looks fine when you have headlights on, because it looks like the light is shining out from the headlights. The second thing that you could do, rear curtain sync or second curtain sync, what happens is the shutter opens and the car is moving and it's creating these blurry lights. And then right before the second curtain closes, pow, the flash fires and it freezes the car over here. And so we have lights that are trailing. So if we had this at first curtain sync, what would happen is we would have a car here and all these lights would be on the car itself. So you can control basically when that freeze happens of a person or a car or a sports person or whatever. And so it's sort of fun. So one of the things that I've seen wedding photographers do is they'll use this technique to capture the dance with the father or dancers at a reception, that kind of stuff. And so it's in a low light situation, and they will have a slow shutter speed. And let's say father and daughter are dancing, and so they're going to be blurred when they're dancing, and I hope they don't dance like this. But they dance, and so they're going to have this blur, but right at the last second, boom, the flash fires, and so there's a frozen image of them on top of a blurred background. If you did first curtain sync, you would have a frozen image with a blur on top. Does that make sense? And so by switching when the flash fires, not only can we drag the shutter and get that really cool blur effect, but we can control how that blur looks in relationship to the freezy part, which is really cool. So I'm going to see if we can try this. And we didn't try this in this room, and it might be a little bit too bright in here. But we're going to take the flash, we're going to put it on the camera. Yeah, there we go. And so Lex, we're going to have you come out here. And for this, what we're going to do is we're going to have all of the lights off and that are in here. Okay, so what I need to do here is reset my flash really fast, and I'm going to reset my zoom to auto. So I'm resetting my flash really, really quickly. There we go. All right, sync. There it is. So on the flash itself, I'll see if I can show everybody here. There's a button that says sync. When I push that, the first thing that shows up is a little H, that's for high-speed sync. And the second thing that shows up is a bunch of little triangles, and that's saying rear curtain sync. And so to see this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slow my shutter down to a half a second and just watch what happens. So I'll do it at a second. So you'll see two flashes. You'll see the first flash, that's the pre-flash, and then in 1 second will go by, and right before the curtain closes, you'll see a second flash. So we're not taking a picture of anything, just watch what happens and listen. So here it goes. Do you see how that happened? If I did first curtain sync, watch what happens. So we're changing when the flash fires. That's all we're doing. Okay, so I'm going to put this on rear curtain sync. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to see what I need to do. So we're going to do this at 1/5 of a second. And so Lex, what I want you to do is to stand in front of these lamps and come out just a bit. There we go. Something like that. I'll see if I can focus in the dark. And I am. And here we go. I'm going to do something sort of wacky. All right. So I zoomed the lens really fast as I shot this. Let's see, this comes up. And here we have all the stuff in the background is being blurred from the zoom of the lens, but Lex is still in front of those things. And I'll try a different technique. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually, I need to make my flash a little bit slower than this. There we go. So we're slowing this down to about 1/2 second. And for this, she's got the eye of the tiger coming out here. I could not have planned this better. I'm demon! That's awesome. So sometimes this doesn't work because these lights back here, those are really, really bright. And so they're going to shine through no matter what. So sometimes this doesn't work the way that you want. So actually, let's have you move to the right so we don't get you a little bit more. There we go. Let's see if we can not have you be a tiger. Okay, so I actually moved the whole back of the scene to get this sort of different effect. And we could do some flash exposure compensation so she wasn't so overexposed. And I'm exaggerating this a bit. So her face is actually getting a little bit of light bouncing around. But that's what dragging the shutter is it's letting the light really slow down. So let's have you even come out a lot more. And I'm going to put this on a tripod now. And this will make sure the background isn't all blurry. Because blurry is cool, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Not always. So we'll raise this up. Raise it up. And so this is just normal dragging the shutter. And I like to use rear curtain sync anytime I drag the shutter. So my rule of thumb is if the shutter is slower than 1/60th of a second, use rear curtain sync. Because I always like the flash to fire at the end of the exposure. If I'm shooting really fast shutter speed, we need high speed sync, which we're going to get to in a second here. So I'm going to try this one more time. Kaboom. And that allows us with this really slow shutter to balance Lex in complete darkness with the background, which is illuminated. So that's how dragging the shutter works. If you're shooting an event, a wedding, something like that, and you have to have really slow shutter speeds just to get some of the ambient light, then rear curtain sync is your friend, big time. Okay, any questions on rear curtain sync?
Yeah,
yes.
A question, Mark. So that first flash fires, correct?
Yes.
How come you don't get a double image? How come you don't end up with does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And in fact, what we'll do, let's turn this back on just for a second. And I'll explain that. Because remember when the ninja happens while the shutter is still closed. So here's what's happened. I'll do it really fast. Again, we have, that's the pre-flash for TTL metering.
Okay, gotcha.
And yeah, so what happens is when you press the shutter release, what's happening is this little pre-flash comes over here, hits the subject, comes back through the lens, is metered, and then the shutter opens and there's a flash. So that pre-flash never makes it through the shutter.
Perfect, thank you.
Why. Yes, yes.
When we see your images come up on screen here, they're kind of like one way and then they pop into something that looks a little cleaner. Is that a profile or?
Well, two things are happening. I'm shooting simultaneously JPEG and RAW images.
Okay.
And so what happens is when it comes into Lightroom, the JPEG preview shows up, and the JPEG image doesn't have as much detail and it doesn't have it's got some modifications set in the camera that aren't necessarily set to the RAW image. And so as soon as the RAW images load, it goes bonk and overrides that JPEG image. That's why there's that delay. If I just shot RAW, it wouldn't do that. It would just take a lot longer for it to appear the first time. Okay, any other questions on that?
I think we are good.
Okay, we need to talk about something else, and that is called high-speed sync, because speed lights are cheaters. So what high-speed sync does is it allows you, if you're using a speed light, to shoot faster than 200th of a second. So how does that work? Well, good news. We have a cool video, and so let's see if this video will play here. When your shutter is moving faster than your camera's sync speed, it never fully opens. To compensate for this, the flash doesn't just fire once, it fires hundreds of small, evenly timed bursts. When the first curtain opens, the flash begins to fire, and as the curtains move over the sensor, the flash continues to fire bursts of light. To the sensor, these multiple flashes appear as one long burst of light, and we get a perfect exposure. Okay, so I'll explain it to you. What happens is the first curtain opens, second curtain closes, but when it's going faster than sync speed, remember, it's just a slit of light that goes by. So at high speed sync, what happens with the speed light is it doesn't do just one burst of light like normal. What happens is when those curtains are moving in a slit, the speed light is actually flashing and flashing and flashing. It's doing a strobe light effect. And so the curtains open here, bam, it exposes that. Curtain goes here, bam, it exposes that. Goes here, bam. And so it's actually not one burst of light, it's hundreds, maybe thousands. And that's how a speed light can break the sync speed barrier. The problem with that is the power of your flash decreases significantly because it doesn't have all the juice to just say, and all one burst of light and throw that light out there. It has to do a bunch of work. And so you can shoot at a much higher shutter speed, but the penalty for that is that your output is much lower. And so to do that on your camera, on a Nikon, there is an FP Sync, I think, in the menu, and you can just tell it to turn on at different speeds, usually 250th of a second or higher. Just go to, it's called focal plane sync on a Nikon. On a Canon, it's high speed sync. And on the Canon cameras, on that sync button where I hit it to go to rear curtain sync, I can push it and it has a little H. And as soon as I do that, now I can take my shutter speed and I can go all the way up to 8,000th of a second if I want to. So Lex, let's have you come out here for just a second and we'll see how effective this is. So we're not going to worry about flattering light. We're just going to see if we can get some light that works. So we're going to have you stand right over here. And I'm shooting right now at f/22 at 8,000th of a second. Let's see if our flash can actually keep up with that from over here. Kaplamo! And this is the funny thing. So that was f/22, 8,000th of a second, and the picture we got was nothing. So there's no way that this flash is going to be able to do that. But if I take this flash, because when it's firing very, very rapidly with an aperture that's so small, there's just not enough light. It can't do it. So it's not like a magic thing that you can shoot at any aperture value, at any shutter speed that you want. It just doesn't work that way. But let's take this down to, let's say, f/2.8, and we'll try that again. Love my jerk stopper. And we'll take that flash. And at 2.8, we've opened up the aperture enough that we can actually get a shot. So that exposure triangle gotcha is you can't just do anything you want with high-speed sync. You've got to make sure that you remember you have to open up the aperture so that light can come through. We could, I think, at f/22, we could have increased our ISO up to a very high level, and it would be sensitive enough to get all of that light. But you can't just say, there we go, high-speed sync, and I can just do anything I want. It doesn't really work that way. The other thing is, I'm going to let you hold that for a second. Thank you. Thank you. With high-speed sync, the ability to freeze motion changes. Because remember, when we had the normal flash, the shutter open, there was one burst of light that was a very short duration of light, and that froze our motion, right? So everything is frozen. If you have a shutter that's moving in a slit and a flash that's going very, very fast, essentially you're freezing motion at the speed of whatever the shutter is. So you're back relying on the shutter to freeze that motion, and you don't get the advantage of the flash freezing the motion. And so there is a trade-off to that. Also, high-speed sync will drain your battery very quickly because it's firing so much, and also it will overheat your flash much quicker than that. Okay, do we have questiones?
We do have questions, and I know Ken and I trying to learn high-speed sync, it took a while for this to sink in, so
yeah,
it takes a bit to soak.
The thing with high-speed sync that I think is frustrating when you first start using it is understanding how much power you lose. And so I did a workshop on high-speed sync for Pocket Wizard, actually, and we were trying to show how you could shoot in extremely bright sunlight at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Phoenix to overpower the sun, and which is a misnomer. We're going to talk about don't use that term, overpowering the sun. But so we were trying to do that, and what we found is we have to have the flash with no light modifier, like extremely close to the subject just to get any light on it to be able to shoot at the shutter speeds and the aperture values we needed to be at to control the ambient light. And so when we wanted to do some really soft portraits, in fact, that portrait I showed at the very beginning where there was the girl outside in the shade, and I added a little bit of light to that, that was shot with high-speed sync, actually. There was a softbox, and it was probably 8 inches from her face. I mean, it was really close, because anything beyond that, the flash just did not have enough power to keep up with the sun.
I think that's a really good point too. When you're talking about shooting in midday sun, that you start with what isn't it good for? How isn't this great?
Yes.
Because I was asking, why don't you just use this all the time? So you have to kind of think about it.
And there is this misconception that you can get gear that will allow you to shoot anywhere at any time and get any result. And that's just not the case. And so when you're working with light, if you're outside in the midday sun and there is just no shade at all, you're not going to get great pictures. You just really aren't. You can go and do some modifications to the light and really work hard at it, and you can get some stuff that works. But wouldn't it be a lot easier just to wait like 5 hours and go when the sun is lower in the sky and find some shade and get a location that works and do it right? I mean, that to me is the best way to do it, instead of trying to force all this gear and get something that is just not working. It's like a bad relationship. If it's not working, it's not working. Give up and move on, right? Don't just like struggle with it until you're exhausted. But yeah, find the light that works and then shoot there. And if it doesn't work, then admit it and move on.
Cool. And Mark, on this subject, Zonas would like to know, can they use high-speed sync feature on studio strobes?
No. There is no high-speed sync on studio strobes as we know them today. There is high-speed sync potentially coming to the new Profoto B1 and some other flashes that are approaching the market in the next 6 months or so. So I think it'll show up eventually. But the difference is a studio strobe is just going to have one burst of light. It's not going to be firing. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. It have to do with the capacitors and how they work and all kinds of things. But a studio strobe, we're going to talk about that tomorrow, working outside with the studio strobe, and how do you compensate for really bright sun, and how do you get past that 200th of a second problem. You know, so if you're outside shooting and you want to have a 2.8 aperture and you can only go to 200, your camera's going to go, whoa, everything's super overexposed. So that's when your neutral density filters will come into play, and you'll have to basically use shade to fix that.
Okay, and just a more basic question from Jay Griffin and Lisa Boston. You've been shooting an aperture. Have you been shooting an aperture for everyone's benefit, for the sake of demonstration, or do you frequently use that mode, or do you use manual usually?
Yes, so aperture priority mode, actually I think I've been shooting in manual mode right now, but aperture priority mode with the speed light does something special. And that is that you can set the aperture and it'll just drop the shutter speed as low as it needs to be to balance ambient light with your flash. If you're in shutter priority mode, what happens is the shutter remains the same and the camera will open the aperture as wide as it needs to be to balance the ambient light. But a lot of times what happens is it just can't open the aperture wide enough, and so you don't get the balance of ambient light with the flash. And so just to keep it simple so we could see the lamps and everything, I just kept it on aperture priority mode so we would get that balance of both things. So yeah, the other thing I will normally do is shoot in manual mode and just manually control that kind of stuff. Okay, Other questions?
Yes, sir. So, because we are getting a lot of high sync speed questions, but they're kind of very specific to certain,
let's hear it.
certain situations. So, Brain, Texas wants to know, how do you get the type of images where there's a dancer leaping in the air and you get multiple images on the frame and there's a strobe that goes off? Is that multiple strobes potentially?
Well, it depends on the type of strobe. I know that I think Chase Jarvis did some stuff with a wrong color. I'm not sure what flash it was, but there are some flashes that you can trigger using, I forgot what it's called, but you can trigger them multiple times. Bam, 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 bam. And so I think Chase had a skier flying through the air. And so what he did is he exposed only for the flash. And so as that skier's flying through the air, the camera's on the tripod, every time the flash fires, there's basically a new exposure, and you get that. And so there is, on speed lights, there's a mode, and what is it called, John? Stroboscopic, thank you. Stroboscopic flash is what it's called. And what you can do is you can program your speed light to fire at different frequencies, like once every tenth of a second, once every second, 100 times a second. So what you can do is you can open up your shutter for a duration of, let's say, a second or two, and then as something is flying by, it's going to be flashing multiple times, and you'll get multiple exposures. I actually made a video about this on YouTube. It's called Stroboscopic Flash. So just Google Mark Wallace Stroboscopic Flash, and you will see a video of me showing how you can throw darts and stuff and do just that.
Cool. All right, question.
Yeah, on a Canon, it's called multi. It's called different things, but in your manual, it'll probably be called stroboscopic.
Okay, and Rapito would like to know, will using a modifier while on high-speed sync help to eliminate potential blades of light that might seep through into the exposure?
So using a light modifier on high-speed flash, will that eliminate blades of light? I don't think I've ever seen blades of light. And I think what they're referring to, potentially you could have the flash firing out of sync with the movement of the shutter. So I have never seen that, so I can't really speak to it. I don't think that would solve that issue, because even if it was a diffused light source, you're still going to have this thing out of sync, and so you'd still, I think, get those blades. But I've not seen any problems with that.
Moonjan would like to know, can we use strobes and speed lights together as main, fill, and rim, and mix them up?
You can. The difference, though, is a studio strobe has a power output between 300 watt seconds to 5 to 1200 to 2400 watt seconds. They're very, very powerful. A speed light has a power output of about 50 watt seconds. So you're talking about hooking a moped up to a Porsche. And so, yeah, they can go along for a ride to a certain extent, but there's some point where that speed light is just not going to keep up. So the way I've seen a lot of people use speed lights and studio strobes is they use the speed lights for anything that is hard light, because you don't have to have any modifiers in front of them, and so they can sort of keep up with a studio strobe that has like a softbox or something, so you can get some specular highlights and stuff like that. But when you start working with the more powerful studio strobes, the speed lights are going to have a tough time pumping out enough light to keep up. But you can definitely mix them. You just have to shoot the speed lights in full manual mode, and you'll do fine. So things like kicker lights, where you're like highlighting somebody's face, throwing light on the background. I use them all the time with studio strobes if I want to, like if I have a lamp like this in a set, when you have the light on and you're shooting it like f16, let's say at 200th of a second, we saw that earlier, this will just go into darkness. And so a lot of times what I'll do if I have lamps or little places around the room is I'll hide speed lights inside those lamps or inside doorways or whatever, and they're just enough light to add some accents. So you can definitely use them together because, yeah, they're all good. I have a couple more things to talk about before we're done. And so it is the reality check of speed lights. So people think speed lights can do everything and they're super powered and all that kind of stuff, but there's a reality check, and that is these guys are not magic. So we just talked about it, the power output versus strobes. So normally a studio strobe, that's about 500 watt seconds, which is sort of an entry-level power output for a studio strobe. That will equal that power output of 10 speed lights. So 50 watt seconds, 500 watt seconds. So the power output is pretty significantly different. And I'm speaking in general terms. I know there's quantum flashes that are 150 watt seconds, et cetera. But studio strobes, there's some that are 300. There are a lot of them that are at 2400 watt seconds and 4800 watt seconds. And so just think of that as horsepower. If you don't know what watt seconds are, we're going to talk about it later. So there's that. There's also this issue of recycle times. So recycle times are the times it takes when you take a picture and the flash is ready to go again. And with a speed light, especially on full power, as you shoot more and more, the batteries get lower and lower, and it takes longer and longer for the flash to be ready to go again. You can put an external battery pack on there that helps, but the recycle times at full power and even half power are generally not anywhere near a studio strobe. So it's hard to do very, very fast shooting unless you really lower the power output of your speed light. And then there are distance limitations, and I would say, I don't know, 50 emails a month from people saying, hey, I want to take a photo of my son, daughter, grandson, whatever, and they're playing football on a field, or they're at a dance recital, or they're doing something way far away. How come my speed light doesn't light them up? And the answer is, well, because you're 200 feet away. So you can't just get, it's not magic. They're not going to go that far. And so there are distance limitations between the speed light and how you can get there. The solution to that, by the way, is to take the flash off the camera, mount it to something close to where they are, and trigger it with a Pocket Wizard or some other radio trigger. So get the flash close and the camera far, you'll be fine. And battery angst. So batteries die all the time in speed lights. And so I can't tell, we had it happening earlier today where we're trying to trigger the flash and the battery was like, oh, I give up, I'm done. So with studio strobes, you eliminate that. And then my favorite reason that I don't use studio speed lights a lot is TTL metering is something that some have mastered and are terrific at it. I don't like it at all. And so almost always when I'm using a speed light, I'm shooting in full manual mode on the speed light and the camera because I'm so used to working that way. TTL metering tends to just change its mind at any given moment. Like we saw earlier when we were shooting Lex, that front light there just all of a sudden said, oh, you know what? I don't need to be that bright. And so we had to make an adjustment after we had it already dialed in. And so that can be very frustrating as you're working through things. Now with practice and with using the same gear in the same situations, you're going to get beyond that. And so that issue is mainly me. But I know that there are a lot of people, David Hobby does this all the time and has for a billion years, and Joe McNally and all the names that we know. They don't have these issues so much, but I think they both shoot in full manual mode, if I'm correct. Yes?
To help combat the recycle times, are there batteries that are better than others?
Yes. There is a company called Quantum, and they make external battery packs that I believe are the best battery packs out there. Much better than the Nikon and Canon battery packs. And then there are different types of like AA batteries that you can use. And the batteries that I've used for years, and it used to be a disciplinary offense in my studio if you bought any battery that wasn't Duracell. I know that sounds crazy, but if you came in with a battery that wasn't Duracell, then you would get in trouble because I'm so particular about those batteries. So in my experience, Duracell batteries live up to the expectations.
Rechargeable versus unrechargeable?
Unrechargeable, in my experience, they perform much better.
Okay.
The problem is now you have a landfill full of recyclable batteries, and they're expensive. Yeah. I recommend getting a Quantum battery pack. Okay. You can charge it up over and over again, and they work great.
On the Quantum works on the high-end Canon, like the 580, 600,
yes.
But the 420 and below don't have a plug on
yes.
it to plug that in, so it has to be the top of the line, at least on the Canon side.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And that's another great point. I said yesterday, somebody asked what flash should they buy, and I said get the top of the line one. And those are the types of things that you're going to find over and over again if you buy a flash that's not the best. You'll find out, oh, wait, I can't put an external battery pack on there. I didn't know that. Oh, I can't use this as a master controller for other flashes. I didn't know that. Oh, this doesn't zoom the way I thought it did. I can't do that. Oh, this doesn't flop down so I can do close-up photography. I didn't understand that. Oh, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's just not readily apparent when you first buy the flash that there are all these things that you're missing out on. Unless you're only using it once in a while to do birthday parties and things like that, you probably don't need that. But if you're a professional photographer, you got to spend the $600 to get the flash that's the right one. Yeah, do that.